Bueno, buenos días, bienvenidos a esta conferencia. Mi nombre es Germán Asís.
Good morning. My name is Germán Asís. I form part of the development team of GeneXus. We've been working on this project for several times. It runs parallel to the rest of GeneXus, and we are thinking that it's going to be the future. We started a macro goal, can be summed up in this sentence. We want a frictionless development experience to raise all obstacles to work with GeneXus. So clearly, to have this type of version, the first thing that we have to do is to be able to work from anywhere. Get out of Windows and work from your browser or from your desktop in any operating systems. But we need a little bit more things for all this. On the one hand, GeneXus has to go beyond the monolithic app, and it has to become a potential modeling tools ecosystem adapted to the various players participating in the development of apps, whether they are designers, business analysts, processes, and so on. So we wanted to have the possibility of having a high user experience, focusing on the main painful issues, and something that falls within this user experience, because it's important, is the introduction of AI assistance. GeneXus must go hand in hand with this revolution and keeping pace with it. There are going to be AI assistants to give potential to user experience, shortening the learning curve, helping me to learn as we go. And the IDE is going to be transformed by this revolution. We don't know what's going to happen, but we think that we'll be able to respond in due time and form. That's why it's important that this version is as flexible as possible. Now, how can we do this? Something that I've already mentioned in other events is that to work from anywhere, we have to have a link between the IDE and GeneXus services, KB modeling, and build and deploy. That logic, the IDE talks through services, but the GX services may be local together with the IDE, or perhaps there may be a cloud server. It doesn't matter. As regards the IDE, to be able to work with a browser and provide a user experience that can be exchanged between the browser and the user, we had to use modern technologies. It's not that we are losing modeling or falling into platforms. Apart from multi-platforms, we have to have a more powerful user experience that can be scalable and lighter. As regards the IDE architecture, to work with these various environments, we had to build a small, what we call a shell, a multi-platform shell that allows us to work from the browser on the native. And that shell is based on item, and this is something that may change in the future. It doesn't matter because it doesn't affect the rest of the IDE. But on that shell, we linked in everything related to the IDE. And so first of all, we wanted to have a good foundation, GeneXus architecture, and on that basis, we build the IDE that we've got at present. I would like to stress this GeneXus foundation because this is a very flexible basis which allows us to reach the goal of having possible ecosystem of modeling tools and IDE or other things. Now, as regards user experience, we wanted to give more power to editors and have more powerful and more scalable editors. For example, the layout editor, we wanted to solve any painful issues and also have more options for modeling. We go to a designer, which is a very flexible component that may be used in other products. And it has a very good performance. It will allow us to have other types of editors as well. Now, all the interface of the IDE, the user interface, is supported on two design systems, Gemini and Chameleon. And so we have the styles, the light and dark modes, they are embedded in the IDE, and everything that has to do with the atoms with which we build the interface, buttons, basic components, combos, grids that we use. It's the same grid that Angular Creator uses for the apps it generates, and so we're using that for the IDE. Then we have standard web components following the standard practice of web development. And all the IDE interface is encapsulated in a components library separated from the IDE. And that's why I refer to the dialogue of creating KBs and objects and Windows Info Export and so on. They are all embedded in the components library. And both the design system and this library are outside the IDE in its development cycle. Is kept outside, and they are under the jurisdiction of our designers and developers who are experts and who can make all this evolve more quickly and be up to date with the latest technology. So we also had an advantage on this technology process. Now, as regards services, I'm not going to go into detail because Christian will refer to this in his talk, but the business logic of GeneXus has migrated to .NET 7. Apart from the platform, as Claudia said, we have an enormous performance in the framework, and we're going to see it in the IDE, and also cross-platform specifier and generators. Let us see what the IDE looks like in this demo, a very brief overview. This is IDE and web mode, because this is the one we wanted to have. It's the more frictionless. We wanted to edit KBs with GeneXus Net and make a low code and make it transparent, and following it up with this IDE. I'm going to open a KB, which is empty, and I'll start working with GeneXus here. Here we have the main objects. The IDE has practically all the objects now, and the interfaces are very similar, quite similar, and this is going to evolve. Most certainly it's going to be transformed, but it's quite similar at present. Now, what we're going to do is, instead of creating the traditional way, we're going to look into the assistants I mentioned, and we have a chat assistant. And let's suppose that we want to model part of the transactions between speakers in the event and the session, and we're going to ask that. Please create transactions and section, so speaker and section. And there we get a connection with a service, creating the transaction.
Y me presenta el resultado, ¿no? Ya me abre los objetos, como ustedes.
You can see in other events, one of the ways of editing in this IDE is through text, where we can edit several parts of the object in the text. In the case of the transaction, the structure is a list of attributes and their properties. What the assistant has generated is good, it's coherent. It's marked with a primary key, with an asterisk, with a character.
Y la foto. En el caso de la
In the case of the session, it's similar. We have the typical attributes of a session, but the important thing is that it related it. It's a foreign key and the name. So it generated a model that is coherent and well related. I could go on working on this, not editing rules here, for instance, with the traditional GeneXus assistant. Intelligence and everything that we have in a GeneXus app. We've got it here. But I may also want to use an assistant here as well. It would be reasonable in the Copilot style, for instance, help me to write a rule that would be to check that the speaker's name isn't empty. And so we could do something like this. In natural language, that isn't the name. And it suggests, Copilot style, suggests a rule of error GeneXus, which checks precisely that. This is very experimental. We are just looking at it and see how we can do it. But the trend is clear. We have assistants with high impact generating things in KB, and more specific assistants modifying a particular thing, like a rule or a property or a type of object or whatever. I may go on working on this code, but let me show you that we have not only the code, but the possibility of editing the structure of the transaction with a typical structure assistant, with the classical properties, or including the shortcuts, detecting the type, the name, allocating domains and specialists for each column. Now, modal editor. So all these capacities are already there. Undo, redo. I could edit it, go back to the code, see the results, modify it, leave it back, go back to the code, and so on. That multimodal edition, to give more potential to the user experience, we wanted to filter to the rest of the IDE. We also have variables. And that's the same with the structures, and obviously the patterns with the classical editor or a pattern editor. Everything is agile in this IDE. The same potential that we have in IDE UI. What can we do with the assistants? Well, let's create a query editing all the sessions filtered in this way. And here the query is generated. Session by name, and here we have the query. I gave the name with the parameter section name and the filter SQL, and that's very quick. Another case, for instance, a workflow process. A classical one of purchases. I haven't given many details. Something was done. It's quite reasonable. What it's doing is quite reasonable. It enters the order, whether it was rejected or not, and it's quite good. I'm showing you this modulator, which is absolutely web. It's more powerful and more agile than the one we had in the IDE UI, with the capacity for editing in place and different tools to move and diagram. All that has already been incorporated. This is a diagram base that we can use for other editors and diagrams in the IDE, and they can be used in the editor because it's web. Something I haven't shown you is the light and dark modes. Let's see, that's the light one. It's instantaneous. Let me change it to dark because it's too strong, too bright. This isn't the final design yet. We are just in it so that it looks more to Next. But the important thing is that all the engineering behind that is quite smooth, and then the designers will send us tokens. So what happens with the screen? Let us look at another more interesting KB. I will open a few panels. If you open a panel in this IDE, you will find an editor that's very similar to the one we have in the Win, with the abstract side, with a classic drag and drop, controls. But there is one important difference, because the component behind this editor is a designer that on the one hand is web, it can be reused in other tools outside IDE, for example, in the workflow or query dashboard or Figma plugin. This is a component that can also handle multiple control libraries, not just the typical controls. Each control can have its own design time and customize the way in which you edit. The component can modify the textual menu options and handle the drag and drop all around the surface, like a grid. Apart from being reusable, it can be extended in many aspects, and this will allow us to have separate editors. It's ready for the next iteration, which is going to be to edit the screen in the mode what you see, what you get. And then you will be able to make a few changes. We also want to provide the option of text. We have a language, and the editor will adapt to that. And this component also pays attention to performance. This is an extreme case of a very long layout where we have many images, and the component will organize it, manage it very well. No problems with memory, for example. So the scalability is much higher, apart from this capacity to be extended, something that you cannot appreciate here, but you will see it soon. Now, regarding the different tools for IDE productivity, we have the main ones. For example, references, objects, browse, any other objects. I cannot show you all of them because there are many, but design systems, for example. This is a real case. It's very easily loaded. Things like import, export, all the tool windows for that are available. We could choose something from here and export it, and we will have the X, P, Z, etc. We also have other issues, quite advanced. Here I have KB connected to TINDEB.
where we can see what is pending in order to compare, to see pending changes. So most of the features that have to do with modeling and productivity tools are here, apart from the editors. This is what I wanted to show you about IDE. So what about the next steps? We want to publish a beta of the KBs generated by Next. You can do this directly in the browser. And we will continue working in editing capabilities to have more editing capabilities. We want to complete some features like dbret or the SAP import that needs to be redesigned. To have more AI assistance, we have a lot of work to do there and research. I will show you an idea of how we see things, and then we have the plugin systems. We want to do this in real time, and we can combine this in different manners. We want to have a plugin system so we can expand the IDE interface without having to reload anything. Now, regarding release issues, when will this be released? We plan to have both the IDE and the generation of platforms to have a beta in the first quarter of next year, and by mid-year we will have a first product ready, a first version ready. Now I will give the floor to Christian, who will talk about services. So carry on with him. Thank you.